Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia Hall, and I'm today's moderator for the Meet a Poet series. I'm a poet myself, hailing from Washington, D.C., where I served as the Youth Poet Laureate in 2023. I'm currently a student at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, where I study English and creative writing, and I'm delighted to introduce today's poet for our Meet a Poet program, Taylor Molly. Taylor is a spoken word poet, teacher advocate, and game designer from New York City. His poetry is both accessible and literary, and even though he was once told he was just like Billy Collins, except even worse, Billy Collins himself calls Taylor Molly a poet of unique properties whose performances are leavened by charm and wit. Molly is a four-time National Poetry Slam champion and one of the original poets to appear on HBO's Deaf Poetry Jam. He's an author of 5 collections of poetry and a book of essays on teaching, and also the inventor of Metaphor Days, a game that helps writers think more figuratively. He lives in Brooklyn, where he's the founding curator of the Page Meets Stage reading series at the Bowery Poetry Club. So, without further ado, I'm going to invite Taylor to read his poems. Take it away, Taylor.
Thank you, Sophia. Sophia and I, this is the first time we've ever met, but do you want to just talk briefly about how you knew to contact me in the first place? How did our paths first cross poetically?
Of course. Our paths first crossed through the Metaphor Dice program, actually, when you first announced this gamification of poetry, and there was a publication and contest opportunity for me to try my hand at rolling my own metaphor dice, and I came up with a metaphor from the dice that was grief is an obstinate midwife, and I wrote a poem actually on the train from New York City back to my home of DC about that prompt and submitted it for publication. And ever since, Taylor and I have been in contact about editing my poem, about publishing the poem, and now our paths meet and cross again for this reading. So
that's right. And your poem did make it into this anthology, Poetry by Chance. All the poems were written by Metaphor Dice, which I might talk about later. You were one of the few people, most of the people who do a poem in here. Now, okay. This person, they rolled "Home is an elusive dance," and that's the title of their poem. Yours was different. You rolled what? Love or grief is a obstinate midwife, and submitted a poem called Doula, which all of us remember who worked on that.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for this opportunity. Dobrevice to those in Moscow. I checked, and you all had a beautiful day today. 75 degrees. If the Fahrenheit scale is the one that you're appropriate. I understand it got up to 78. That's just the perfect kind of weather. Here in New York City, it is a very, very hot day. Today, we are going to be in the mid 90s. And if you're watching this later online, today is the day that France will take on Spain in the World Cup, which I will be watching later. I have a selection of poems that I have submitted to the American Center in Moscow. Thank you so much for having me here. And I'm going to read them in that order and maybe talk a little bit about each one as they come up. And I noticed as I was going through these poems last night, familiarizing myself with what I had chosen, that a lot of them are quite formal. I think there's more than one sonnet in here, and lots of rhyme. All right, let's get into it. This first poem is called Old Flame. You can relight a candle after the flame's blown out by holding a match in the path of the smoke. It's quite a trick to watch, the fire following the wisp to the wick, igniting tiny bits of wax that never burned away. My 10-year-old does it over and over, delighted by the flames. I love him so much, but every time he does it, I think of you. Old flame, right? In English, an old flame is like an old lover who still perhaps kindles fire. This is not specifically about an old lover. In fact, I dedicated it to my wife. It says for RBK, Rachel Beard Khan, my wife, and the mother of my 10-year-old who is now 11. And this is one of those poems that came to me like normally you would think that a metaphor is constructed by, here's what I want to say. Now, what's a good metaphor for that experience? And this one came backwards. Like, here I am with my son having a fantastic time doing that trick with a candle where you blow out the candle and then you see the wisp of smoke rising up. And if you take a flame and hold it up at the top of the smoke, zip, it zips down the smoke and relights the candle. It's like, wow, that is a metaphor for, you know, restirring old love feelings for somebody, you know, long ago. Old flame. You can relight a candle after the flame's blown out by holding a match in the path of the smoke. Let's watch for how many times the opening stanza is the first sentence. There's no rule in poetry that says that poetry has to be governed by the same grammatical rules that govern prose. Nevertheless, in my work, invariably, my poems are written like prose. They follow the rules of prose, except they've got a little bit of extra rhyme, a little bit of extra wisdom behind the word choices, and they've been delineated in such a way. You can relight a candle after the flame's blown out by holding a match in the path of the smoke. It's a trick to watch, the fire following the wisp to the wick, igniting tiny bits of wax that never burned away. My 10-year-old does it over and over, delighted by the flames. I love him so much, but every time he does it, I think of you. Future grief. Today, I took portraits of every third grader in my son's class as a favor to his teacher, starved as she is so early in the year for anything colorful she can put on the walls next to Savannah's poem about flowers or Jimmy's drawing of a soccer ball. First stanza, one sentence. Did it again. I take great photos, mostly because I keep the window at my back, use portrait mode to blur the background, and never zoom in. Plus, I loop the line of children behind me, so my subject is always facing all their classmates and cannot help but laugh at the attention they each receive in turn. One click, and I get it. Maybe two. Next. But later. Swiping through the lot of them, one after the other, all of them adorable with missing teeth, dirty faces, and wild hair. I learned to see beyond the cuteness and glimpse the adults they would become. This one, a mother far too young. This one, a drunk. This one, lonely until the day she jumps. You're probably not supposed to say this, but there was so much pain in their lives they had not yet lived, and I could see it in their eyes or the dark circles beneath them. I am so sorry for your future loss, I wanted to say to so many, even my son, especially my son, who will never know what it's like to have a young father. But isn't that what we poets do? Wish you strength for what you no doubt someday soon will have to go through. It's interesting I didn't end that last line with a question mark, right? Because I'm asking a question of the reader at the end. Isn't that what we poets do? You know, wish you strength for what you no doubt someday soon will have to go through? Question mark. I think in an earlier draft, I probably did have a question mark there, and I took it out. So it's more like, I'm telling you what we poets do. Also, I remember wrestling with the order of the words in that final two lines. But isn't that what we poets do? Wish you strength for what you no doubt someday soon will have to go through. That terrible line about, I mean, you're not supposed to, you are absolutely not supposed to say that you can see the grief that, you know, when you're in third grade in the States, you're 8 years old, 8 or 9 years old. They start first grade at about age 6. So if you ever want to figure out what grade somebody, how old somebody is in the American system by what grade they are in, subtract or add 6 to the grade, and that's how old they are. So third graders start at age 8 and then end up usually at age 9. I have my daughter is just finished third grade, and she's 9, and she will turn 10 at the end of the summer. So that line about one is going to be a drunk, one is a mother far too young, this one a drunk, this one lonely until the day she jumps. That is a dark, dark line, and something you cannot say about an 8-year-old kid. Like, hey, those dark circles that I see underneath your eyes make you look like you've lived a life filled with challenging depression, which unfortunately looks like it will one day win. I have known what it's like to live with someone who is clinically depressed, and this poem touches on that, and it is called Late Wife Present. You know that in English, my late wife doesn't mean the one who's never on time. Late is another word for deceased. Late wife present. Let's see how long I drag out that first sentence. In fact, this whole poem looks like it might be just 2 sentences. I'm not sure though. Let's check. Late wife present. Sitting on the sofa tonight with one child on either side, sagging sleepward as I read aloud. My present wife ministering to this moment of holy and ordinary happiness, first with cheese, then apple slices, and later jammies, pajamas, dryer warm, and finally a wet washcloth for all our upturned faces. I cannot help but think of you, my late wife, how you said the day you married me was the day you deprived the world of a great dad, adding guilt-stricken, and the world needs all the great fathers it can get its perfect tiny hands on. That's one sentence. Rebecca, Holocaust survivor's daughter, now 21 years gone, failed warden of your family's wreckage, grief-racked wraith of sorrow and childless mother to never be. Tonight, let's make a deal. Forgive me now for how I would have likely left the night I realized you were right. And I'll forgive the part of you that stepped through our open bedroom window and made yourself let go of everything, the laden dark, your life, and me, thinking it would set me free. Poems are under no particular obligation to tell the truth, the God's honest truth, the factual truth. The job of the poet is different than the job of the journalist. It's more about speaking your truth with a capital T, even if you have to change the facts a little bit to get at that greater truth. That said, all of my poems are based in truth. And Rebecca was the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. My former father-in-law died. I wasn't in touch with him anymore, but he died a few years ago, so I heard. And apparently 90% of the children of Holocaust survivors are clinically depressed. A trauma they inherit from their genes. And when Rebecca and I got married, she said, you do realize that if we get married, we're not going to have kids. And I was like, yeah, I know. And she said, no, because I do think, in fact, I know you'd be an amazing dad. I was like, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. And so she always felt guilty that she was depriving the world of a great dad. And here I'm saying, let's make a deal. Forgive me now for how I would have likely left you the night I realized you were right. Oh, wow. You know what? You're depriving the world of being a great dad. You don't want to be a mom. I need to be a dad. I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you. If you forgive me now for how I would have left when I realized you were right, I'll forgive the part of you that stepped through our open bedroom window and made yourself let go of everything, the laden dark, your life and me, thinking it would set me free. You think you can set me free by taking your own life? Ooh. It's been a tough kind of freedom, but I've got kids now, and that's a victory of sorts. All right, another dark poem. This is called Packing. It's for my wife's stepfather, who is, she's out in Seattle right now, visiting him. He's not doing well and will likely die quite soon. Although we've been saying that for a while. You know the story about the guy who got sick and was afraid he was going to die? And then he got a little more sick and was afraid he wasn't going to die. Makes me think of this. His name is Mike, and this is called Packing. And although this poem is 2 stanzas, the entire poem is 1 sentence. I think I see a theme developing. Packing. Dear and gentle man, grandfather to my children, as you unpack and prepare for the next journey, for your next journey, know that your daughter now carries with her at the bottom of her purse a pink-handled tactical knife with a fixed blade just under the legal limit for New York City, which is 4 inches. But you can carry a fixed blade if the blade itself is just under 4 inches. It's fine to have that in your purse. Dear and gentle man, grandfather to my children, as you unpack and prepare for your next journey, know that your daughter now carries with her at the bottom of her purse a pink-handled tactical knife with a fixed blade just under the legal limit for New York City, so that if she were ever to be the victim of a violent assault during her twice-daily commute to and from her office, she might, in her own words, get in a few good stabs, or maybe take out an eye, just as you would no doubt have done to me if I had ever hurt her or did not turn out to be the man you think she deserves. My wife Rachel said, after one of those tragic attacks that happens on the New York City subway system. We've had a few of them in the last year. Just crazy people going nuts, berserk, pulling out a knife, stabbing people. And Rachel was like, am I crazy, or should I be carrying a knife in my bag so that, if I ever meet somebody crazy on the subway, and I don't have to go down like this. I can pull out the knife, and maybe I'm going to die, but I'm going to take an eye with me, And I was like, she said, should I talk to my stepfather about this? I was like, no. Let me get you a knife. You absolutely need to have a knife, but it needs to be legal. So you can't get a switchblade. Switchblades and stilettos are not legal in the United States. And I thought, it'll be in a case. You'll carry it at the bottom of your purse, but it needs to be a fixed blade, one that's, you pull it out of a scabbard, and not one that you pull it out of the case and then have to unfold it. You just keep your hands off me until I have unfolded my sharp knife that my husband gave me and didn't quite think it through. I thought it through. I was like, here's a knife for you. Don't tell your father that you haven't, that I didn't give this to you years ago. All right, this next poem is called All Children Eventually Come to Think the Moon. You can see I stole that line from a line in the poem to be the title. If you're looking at the text of this poem in Russian or in English right now, it looks like a sonnet. I can see it ends with a rhyming couplet. Looks like 14 lines, 6 plus 6 plus 2. And I'm pretty sure this is a sonnet, although I'm looking at the end rhymes and it might not be strictly Shakespearean. I tend to write Shakespearean sonnets. That's the one that ends with the rhyming couplet rather than the Italian sonnet. I like the little bow at the end, the way it ties it up neatly. All children eventually come to think the moon. With all the world's disasters piled high upon your plate, who can afford to write about the sky? Or idly wonder why, for instance, all children eventually come to think the moon is following their family's car on nighttime drives, floating beyond the branches like a silent, lost balloon, making sure that everyone they love and who loves them survives. You said you'd love to write about the sky instead of always picking at the many shades of hate. So let me here confess, in case you had not guessed, I am one who often writes about the wondrous life I've led. Then again, there's no angry mob that wants me dead. So I've got that going for me. #blessed. The world needs your wisdom, and so do I. But know that if you need them, I will share the moon and sky. I have led such a lucky, privileged, entitled, cushy life that it's completely natural for me to just want to go through the world observing the sky, the flowers, the moon. Oh, I remember the moon used to follow me when I was in the car. My work is not often political. It's not about current events. And for other poets, that is what they absolutely feel they must write about. Maybe there are people who are denying their existence, wishing them dead, wishing their gender dead, wishing that they would just pick a goddamn gender. You said you'd love to write about the sky instead of always picking at the many shades of hate. So let me here confess, in case you had not guessed, I am one who often writes about the wondrous life I've led. Then again, there's no angry mob that wants me dead, so I've got that going for me. #blessed. The world needs your wisdom, and so do I. But know that if you need them, I will share with you the moon and sky. I'm going to see whether I can put in, I will share with you. I don't think this poem is published. I think a lot of these poems are unpublished. So I made that little change, and we'll see whether that survives the next time. Here's a new poem, and this is a sonnet. It's called The Other Edit, about a professor I had who he had a interesting. I see. I'm seeing comments, but it's not in the public chat, so we'll talk about it later. This professor I had, he had a very interesting way of speaking. He was always grumbling and making weird noise. A brilliant, brilliant professor. But every lecture he had was, in between the brilliance was these weird, wonderful noises that he made while speaking. And so I recorded one of his lectures and edited it to take out all of the ums and ahs and ers and weird noise grumblings. And it sounded nothing like him. Although, I mean, of course, it was oddly edited, but you got to just the gist, the brilliance, just the brilliance of what he wanted to say. And but it sounded nothing like him. And luckily, I had saved all of the grumblings and weird noises in another track, and I put that one together. I would play it for people, like, hey, this is what the professor, here's his lecture. And they're like, okay, that doesn't sound anything like him. And it's like, here's the lecture with just the nonsense. And they're like, that sounds like him. So I wrote this poem about it. It's a sonnet. Also Shakespearean. And this one is probably very regular. A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, G, G. The Other Edit. My professor had a way of speaking his students loved to copy, filled with ums and ers and gravelly groans and grumblings. Everyone loved what he said, even though he said it sloppy. In the end, his wisdom could transcend his idiosyncratic mumblings. But when one lecture was recorded and I was editing the tape, I cut out the weird and wonderful noises in my first attempts to edit, leaving only what he meant to say. And although it sounded great, his lecture didn't sound like him and the normal way he said it. Luckily, I'd kept the noises in a place where I could find them, a separate audio file where I pasted them one by one. Oh, the utter noisy nonsense when I started to combine them. This track lacked all the wisdom, but it was so much more fun. And it sounded more like him, said all his students and his friends, and somehow, amidst all the noise, it made a kind of sense. Here's a long poem. This is the longest poem I'm going to read, and it's called Recently Deleted. And if anybody, Sophia, if you want to, if I'm doing well on time, then no need to leave me a message. But if I'm blathering on too much between poems, go ahead and leave me a note. Otherwise, I'm going to just keep blathering on. I'm having a good time. I hope you are too. I thought this was going to be a book of poems about photographs. I take a lot of photographs. I've already done a poem about, the third grader had me take pictures of all of her students, which I did. And they're great, especially with that trick of having the window to my back so that the light is on the subject, and then taking all the third graders and having them stand behind me. And one by one, they get in front of me and they're smiling at the camera and me and all my friends. So I've got all of these tips for how to take pictures and all of these theories about what makes a better picture. And I thought it was going to be a small chapbook, but it turns out it was just one long poem. It's four pages. And it's called Recently Deleted, which, if you ever know, on an iPhone, there's that's the time it is right now. there is an album called Recently Deleted. And when you throw away a photo, it goes into that album for 30 days so you can retrieve it. And with one of the updates that Apple came up with a couple of years ago, they decided to make viewing that album of recently deleted photos something you had to you have to enter a passcode to get into it. Because if you take any embarrassing photos of yourself thinking that they're going to be, I don't know, sexy, and it doesn't work out that way, or after you've sent them to whoever you're going to send them to, where do you put them? You delete them. And so recently deleted is that's a personal album that you should be protected. Recently deleted. Here's to the epic and heroic, or the accidentally beautiful or colossally stupid moments we thought we were capturing on video, along with audio consisting of the astute observation, I'm getting this on video, only to discover too late that we missed all of it because we were actually taking a photo instead, just before the good part, which we missed entirely. Here's to everything we have ever missed capturing on film. And while we're at it, here's to the opposite, the awkward selfies that turn out to be 3-second videos that were supposed to be photos, all ending with the same variation of, wait, God damn it, I'm taking another video. Here's to the parts of our lives we thought we were capturing that we missed, or that turned out to include the shadow of our finger in the corner. Every photo, the same finger in the same corner. Here's a photo of Stonehenge and my finger. What evidence is there to our lives except our own bodies? And speaking of bodies, here's to the checks we have deposited using photos taken while naked and the posture we must maintain to make sure we only get the check. Here's to the times we got it right and got gold. Here's to the photos that are worth getting printed. I love that. I want that blown up and stuck on my wall. Here's to a perfectly overcast day, or being backlit in just the right way. Here's to the setting and the rising sun, and even more to the clouds who understand the weaknesses of light. God, here's to light, which is everything, and to darkness, shadow, contrast, and black point. To learning to look at the lens and not the image of you looking at the image of you, to the connection of eye contact, to looking through the camera to the viewer. Here's to the Pied Pipers pointing out of frame at something fascinating over there, which is actually nothing, but no one needs another photo of children whining about having their photo taken. So everyone, look where my finger is pointing. Here's to the way others look at us in photos, or how we long for them. Looks of such pure love, the photo seems to scream, someone in this photo's heart will soon break, but no one knew that at the time. Here's to videos left running after the family photo has been taken, when someone said something that made us all laugh and look younger than we are now. Here's to the depth of field behind us and everything that is not in focus. Here's to wide angles and zooms and stop motion and slow motion and long exposures and the elongated contortions of panoramic photos and the wisdom to know when to use one or two and when not to use any at all. Here's to someone catching us looking beautiful when we weren't even trying to, and to trying to look beautiful and failing and loving the failure anyway. That's just me laughing historically, and yes, that's my finger in the upper left corner. Here's to the reflection of the photographer that can be seen in our eyes. Sometimes not the eyes, but in the glasses, right? You can often, especially if they're wearing mirrored sunglasses, you can often see what's going on in the rest of the photo, just in the reflection of somebody's glasses or eyes if you're really close. Here's to the album called Recently Deleted, where we stash the nudes we took of ourselves that were deemed not good enough to send to any lover. And of course, the others, the beautifully filthy photos we took for one lover. Look how my toes are actually curling, but kept long enough to send to another, as if to say, here's what I looked like one time when I was younger, flushed with excitement and hungry for someone else. And yes, that is my finger. And last but not least, here's to the former friends and exes who have been cropped out of photos for one reason or another. I love this photo of us so much, especially now that it looks like it was only ever us all along. Here's to the people who just don't belong because we don't love them anymore, or they broke our hearts, or it's just not appropriate that they be in this LinkedIn profile photo or dating app avatar. Sometimes we love how we look and we refuse to let you ruin that for us, even though you are the reason we may have been glowing in the first place. Here's to your arm draped around my shoulder. Here's to your hand ever raising a glass. Here's to your ear still in the photo, because cutting it out completely would have required losing as well too much of me. Of course, now Apple there's a new feature in iPhoto that is called Clean Up. And if you take a picture of somebody and they look stunning on the beach, especially if you've used portrait mode, so the beach in the background is kind of blurry, you can, in the editing, when you're in the editing mode, you can hit Clean Up and the phone will say, oh, you want me to get rid of this person or that boat in the background? And you can just clean up the photo. That poem was written during a time when they didn't have that. So there were certain times where, like, I love this photo of me and I want to use it for my, LinkedIn profile, but here's a glass of champagne that is right next to it. I'm getting questions here. Let me see what they say here. I'm curious about your perspective. How can poetry inspire students and influence the way we learn today? Vitali from Kazakhstan. How can poetry inspire students and influence the way we learn today? That's quite a task to put on poetry. I would rather get them to fall in love with words. And whenever people leave my reading, sometimes they say, I never knew that poetry could be like that. And that's what I want to do with poetry, is to urge people to say, to realize that there's a whole lot more you can do with poetry. When did you write your first poem? At what age? And what was the poem about? My father wrote poems, and I wrote my first poem when I was 5, and it was about going to Central Park with my babysitter and stepping in dog poop on the way there. And my babysitter told me that you have to look down when you walk. So coming back from Central Park, I was looking down so that I didn't step in dog poop again, and I bumped into an old lady. And she said, Taylor, you have to look up when you walk. So my first poem was about how life is hard, because if you look up, you step in poop, and if you look down, you bump into an old lady. All right, I've been told I don't have to answer the questions in the chat at this moment. I just wanted to say that when you give your phone to somebody, it's like, hey, could you take a picture of us? And you see that they're going like this. There, okay, all right, and you're like, no, your finger, you gotta, don't ruin the photo. All right, a few more, and then Sophia's going to come in and tell us what we're doing. What passes for order? This is about folding fitted sheets, which some people find extremely difficult, but I love folding fitted sheets, and I find it a kind of origami, and these are all my tricks. This is a type of poem called a villanelle, which has, it's a repeating form. Every line is repeated twice. If I'm doing my job right, the line has an extra sort of overtones the second time around when I say it. And then the two lines that get repeated the most get repeated at the end as a rhyming couplet. The epigraph is a line of poem that I never could manage to work into the poem itself, so I just decided to use it as an epigraph. Everything has a good side, a bad side, an inside, and an outside. And the only trick is making sure that the inside is also the bad side. When you're folding a fitted sheet or writing a poem, hide all the difficult, all the ugly stuff, hide the ugly stuff in the middle of it. I write poems the same way I might fold a fitted sheet, with every ragged edge of truth included out of sight. If you make the inside messy, you can keep the outside neat. I smooth the ripples as I go, with hands slow and fleet. Think of how a windy day has its way with a wild kite. I write poems the same way I might fold a fitted sheet. Start with insides out, so when the corners nest and meet, the outer and the inner sides invert and reunite. If you keep the inside messy, you can make the outside neat. A single line can have a rhyme, like a sheet can have a crease, herding and rewording as each fold gets half as wide. I ride my poems the same way I might ride a fitted sheet. The crafted order of our fabric helps everyone to sleep, inviting the body bedward with all overtures of night. If you make the inside messy, you can keep the outside neat. Attention and invention make the task complete. If everything is tight, then you've probably done it right. If you make the inside messy, you can keep the outside neat. I write poems the same way I might fold a fitted sheet. That's a villanelle, but I realized I was describing another type of poem called a pantoum. All right, 3 more short ones. The Calculus of Thirst. This is another new one, and it is also a sonnet, I think. I used to drink 2 beers every other night as a way of weaving virtue with release. Not drunk nor dry, an orderly delight, a treaty signed between myself and peace. But now I hoard my measured, sober days and let my thirst grow disciplined and lean. For 6 long nights I keep my temperate ways, then drink 3 beers and consider my craving seen. My wife says, why not 1 each night instead? That seems more healthy, wealthy, wise. Frankly, my dear, I'd rather be dead. I need the feast sobriety provides. It's not so much the excess, but how it arrives, how abstinence sharpens, how pleasure thrives. Oh, this is the last one. The last piece of paper. I have 2 pieces of paper in my hands, but the last poem, the last piece of paper is blank. It was just sitting in my printer when I printed the poems last night. This is a great one to end on. This is sort of a good philosophy. I try to write every day and fail often every day. And here's how I beat myself up about it. Sophia, get ready to join me when this poem is over. This is called Even If Only About Everyday Things. If you do not write every day, even if only about everyday things, you let rust the very machine of astonishment and song you were put on this earth to maintain. I should be writing every day because that helps the machine stay oiled and keeps it in good working order. And speaking of good working order, welcome back, Sophia.
Thank you. Wow. You have delighted us with all of your excellent poems and the wonderful context behind each one of them, and also like the little idiosyncrasies of the English language too, especially since your conversation about the poems was so rich and you were revising the poems in real time. It felt like almost a master class of what poetry is, or how to write a Taylor Molly poem specifically, one
That's the
that
only kind of
runs
poem
on.
that I fear. I'm teaching workshops on and off this summer at various places, and I realized that's the only kind of poem that I can teach anybody how to write is a Taylor Molly poem. Although I'm getting to the point where if somebody reads me a poem, I used to not be able to appreciate even a good poem unless it was something that I wished I had written. You know,
Hmm.
when you see a work of art and you go, "Oh God, I wish I had done that." I mean, it's a terrible feeling, but it means there's something, you know, there's talent out there that you wish you had. You like your game recognizes their game, and I used to be not a good enough teacher to encourage students to write poems that weren't like the ones that I could write. I used to only be able to teach people how to write the kind of poem that I write, and maybe I still can. But
That's interesting. I feel like one of the ways to be a teacher is to show students how to write the poem that's most authentic to them. So I think since your poems are so authentically you, maybe it leads students down the wrong path to try to emulate you, but at the same time, they could also dig deep and figure out what parts of their language are authentically them and that they could use.
well, one
And
person said,
yeah,
there is no teaching but by example. There is no teaching except by example. So it might be useful for people to see me being authentically me all the time, and they take away the wrong lesson if they try to also be me. The advice, be yourself, everybody else is already taken. So write like you, because everybody else's style is already, don't write like me, I'm already doing that. um,
yeah,
yeah,
that spot is taken up by Taylor Molly.
afraid so.
Can't replicate it. And we already had so many questions popping up in the chat. Please, for everyone listening, feel free to keep them coming. I wanted to start off this Q&A session with one of your fun facts that you provided, which
Oh, okay.
was that your first fun fact was that you convinced 1,000 people to become teachers and then donated 12 inches of your own hair to the American Cancer Society. So that segues into my question that teaching is such a central part of your identity, both professionally and artistically. And you had this book called What Teachers Make, in praise of the greatest job in the world, which celebrates the profession. And many of your poems have found their way into the classroom. And how do you see the relationship between teaching and your poetry? Do you think your poems are trying to teach readers something, or is teaching simply another extension of being a poet?
It's funny, I went to graduate school in the early 90s to become a better poet. But unlike my classmates who ended up getting PhDs in creative writing or rhetoric, or literature, and went on to teach college, I had to teach freshman composition. It's a writing class. When you go to college, everybody has to take a class at college or two, that just makes you write a lot. So I wasn't teaching poetry, but that was my first taste of teaching, and I loved it. I loved it. And so, although I went to school to become a better poet, that's where I discovered a love of teaching. And I taught for many years, and I wrote poems about teaching. And it was hearing some of those poems that got me back. I would go to the poetry slam and read my poems about teaching. So there's always been a dance between poetry and teaching. So your question is quite apt. And I find that the job of the teacher and the poet is to be the midwife, the doula, if you will, of epiphany. I
Hmm.
want to lead you by the hand to a new understanding, whether I'm a teacher or a poet. So they are close. Those two jobs are so
Right.
closely linked in my mind.
And there are so many great examples of that epiphany occurring in your poetry. In a haiku form, you always have that turn, which is like the hinge of a haiku. But in your sonnets, you have a great voltas, especially in All Children Eventually Come to Think of the Moon, when you have that realization, oh yes, it's about this realization that children have, like the moon isn't actually following you, that's just the illusion. But then also the poem becomes about the themes of poetry itself. It becomes a meta pedagogical poem. It's teaching about the teaching of poetry and the passing and what poetry can give us, which I think was really cool and really clever.
Well, T.S. Eliot said all poems are at some level always about the act of writing poetry. It's about the only thing I like that T.S. Eliot said. Did you grow up thinking that the moon, did you have a moment where you
Oh,
thought
100%. A
the moon is
hundred percent.
following me?
That's a universal experience, I think.
And that
I
is
just,
the job
yeah.
of the poet is to capture those things and put them in words and make people think, oh, I thought I was the only one. You know, I'm so glad to hear that somebody else had that experience. One of my favorite definitions of poetry is what oft was thought, but never so well expressed. What often,
Mhm.
what everybody has thought, but nobody's put it in these words.
Yeah. And I think there's also this misconception of poetry where if you want to say something that will speak to everyone, it has to be a very general statement that everyone can agree with, but it's actually the opposite. You have to be
Correct.
super specific
That's right.
with a personal detail, and
That's
that's
right.
what opens it up to the
Right.
universal.
Right.
You've shared some great quotes like T.S. Eliot, and even in your bio, you talked about Billy Collins. So we had a question from the audience from Jana, who asked, who is your favorite poet?
Billy Collins, my former uh, off erstwhile teacher and friend, Billy Collins. It's such a
Mhm.
wonderful mix. Everybody, he gets sort of written off as a he in his blurb of me. He says, you know, people write. What did they say? Taylor, he gets written off as a slam poet, but his poems are leavened by charm and wit. Not that I've memorized what Billy Collins has to say about me, but I totally have. I actually don't have to memorize it because I have it tattooed here on my arm. Not true. But he gets written off as simply a wry, ironic, funny poet. But his poems are just so clever. And when I read a Billy Collins poem, I'm like, damn it, there's another poem that I cannot write because Billy Collins also
He
wrote
beat
it.
you to it.
He beat me to it.
Yeah.
I also
And
love Mary Oliver, David White, and let's keep it there for now.
well, one of the poems that my 10th grade English teacher used to teach poetry to us was first a Billy Collins poem that was an Ars Poetica about poetry, like being inside of a conch shell and all the different places where like poetry hides.
Mm-hmm.
So he's always often used to teach. And I was also intending on bringing up Mary Oliver in our conversation because I
Okay.
recently saw her documentary, Saved by the Beauty of the World, which is so great. Um, I saw it actually at the IFC Center in New York City. But she is a poet that writes strictly and solely about the natural world, and many people criticized her about not speaking up or not making her poems political, but actually like having this narrow focus on plants and animals and ecosystems that just defined and shaped her poetics. So I think it's great that everyone kind of has their own niche that they can really take hold of. And for you, it almost seems like it's photography. Those were some themes that were coming up in your work. And each one of your poems almost feels like a snapshot of a moment. So you can have like a poem that's a Polaroid almost.
That's possibly a better title for recently deleted. Snapshots, Polaroid.
There we go. constantly revising,
Yep.
even in a conversation. I have so many questions for you.
Shoot.
I wanted to ask you more about the Metaphor Dice production, since that was what initially connected us. Could you walk us through how that project came to life?
Yeah, and actually, it has to do with Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver, in her most famous poem, Wild Geese, has the line, it begins, "You do not have to be good. You do not have to wander through the desert on your hands and knees repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves." What is the body? The body is a soft animal, the soft animal of your body. The body is one of those things that we need a metaphor for to understand. Human culture, the world over, every human culture that has ever been on Earth has developed some kind of metaphorical language to help us talk about the big things in life that are hard to talk about, like death or my soul, or I am. Who am I? So in Metaphor Dice world, the red die are the big things that you might talk about, and the blue ones are the smaller objects that you could compare them to. I am a type of dance. I'm a bullseye. I'm what does that say? Is that curveball? It was upside down. I'm a
That was a
curveball. That's a
curveball.
baseball metaphor. I can't see these. A drum, and then the white ones are the adjectives. I am a bright. I am a bright curveball. So you roll them and you get red, white, and blue. My soul is a glorified animal, the glorified animal of my soul. So this is how Mary Oliver might have gotten that line. She's writing about, oh, you do not have to be good. You don't have to drag yourself through the desert on your hands and knees repeating. You only have to, God, what do? You only have to let your body love what it loves. Oh, I need a metaphor. I need a metaphor for the body. Okay, so she doesn't need to roll the red because she already has it. The body. You only have to let the soft, okay, the soft what of your body? The soft animal of your body. So I wanted to come up with some sort of gamification of the creation of metaphor, at least in that, when metaphors are put together like that. An abstract noun equals a metaphor it's a way of speaking in a secret code that everybody knows, right? Love.
Yes.
I have a poem called How Falling in Love is Like Owning a Dog, right? And I'm going to spend the rest of the poem talking about owning a dog and living with a dog in the house. But that I'm also talking about love. Your body is a soft animal. Concept, adjective, object. You can
Yeah.
move it around a little bit. And so, it's just been wonderful. I invented this game. It's really not a game. It's a prompt generator. But my friend and former student, who's now my business partner, Oliver, when we were coming up with the words to put on the dice, I said, "Hey, I think mad is a fantastic adjective to use." And he's like, "I don't care. I don't care about the adjective. How do you win?" And I would say, "There's no winning. It's a poetry game." And he said, "Taylor, do you realize how many more sets of metaphor dice we would sell if there were a way to win?" We were on Amazon. I think we're getting kicked off Amazon because we didn't want to do something they wanted us to do. Now the only place that you can get it is metaphordice.com.
It's an exclusive access only on that website.
Right.
Well, I wonder, maybe you can win if you write a poem based off of every single possible combination of red, white, and blue. Like, has someone been crazy enough to do that?
24 times 24 times 24.
God.
It's over 13,000. So you could write a poem every day and it would take you 5 years, to do it. That's we developed an app. The die, a set of metaphor dice is 4 reds, 4 whites, and 4 blues. So that's why I got the 24 times 24. The dice themselves are D6s. The first iteration of the metaphor dice was just one color of each, one set of each color. And that's 6 times 6 times 6. That's 216 unique metaphors. But you find that even with 3 D6s, it would take you, all day to roll all 216 unique ones. So we thought of doing making the dice in D20s. A 20-sided figure is called an icosahedron, and every side is an equilateral triangle. The problem is it's a huge, heavy ball of acrylic, and it would be just too dangerous to throw. So we came up with, all right, instead of having a multi-sided die, that would be 20 times 20 times 20. That's 8,000, right? 8,000 unique, but it would be harder to package. 3 balls bigger than a golf ball. It would be heavy like a lacrosse ball, almost. A heavier
lot of
package,
shipping fees.
Shipping fees. Don't get me started.
Yes.
So we
this is like the business of being a poet, or business of being a poet inventor.
It's fun to a point, but it's great to have somebody like Oliver take care of the taxes and stuff.
Well, I'm also curious. We're running a little bit short on time, so I'm just going to rapid fire 2 more questions at you.
I'll be quick.
But your last poem was all about writing every day and like aspiring to write and have this daily practice. Right. So one, like, what does your writing practice look like? And do you ever use metaphor dice in it? How do you incorporate them?
Not as often as I should. When I'm using metaphor dice in my writing practice, I'm usually filming it, and I'm going to put it on social media to try to get other people to go, hey, I should spend $20 and buy a set. So I don't use metaphor dice for fun. If I'm gonna actually be doing, and I should be writing more. I've invented the dice, so that I've got no excuse. Like, oh, I've got nothing to write about. Guess what? Now you do. There you go. Write about how happiness is a desperate animal. The desperate animal of happiness. Of course it is. It writes itself. But when I'm writing with metaphor dice, I'm going to film it, and it's going to go on Instagram. I write a lot of letters by hand, and those are often the first draft. The first draft of, here's my stationery. It doesn't say Taylor Molly printed. That's actually a cutout.
Oh, cool. You're through the silhouette.
Yeah, right. I had that laser printed. So often poems start out as letters. I'm a huge fan of this is called a pigeon letter, based on a Victorian style of folding up things to.
Mm-hmm. That's so amazing. Well, I can also tell you're very theatrical based on all of the props that you keep pulling out. It's very fun and visual and engaging.
I did go to drama school. I can't hide that.
Amazing. And then my last question is, you've had such an amazing poetry career that I wish we could go more in depth, but between appearing on HBO's Def Poetry Jam series, to creating the metaphor dice, to having your chapbook published by Rattle, and all of the other books and small successes and victories, and of course the pitfalls of poetry in between, what has been the most rewarding part of your career as a poet?
Finally, at age 50, finding the right woman and creating 2 children. It sounds so pathetic and stereotypical, but my poetry has just danced around fatherhood for so long, and the most rewarding is, like, now I've got these 2 poems in progress that are mine, at least partially mine. At least they pretend like they're mine until I'll until I realized that they are absolutely not mine. But that's if I am not writing as many poems as I should these days, it's because I am pouring myself into being the father that I never thought I would be for a long time.
I don't think it's pathetic at all. I think it's great that you have this source of fulfillment and subject material. So many writers write about their families, and poems and children are very alike. You think that you can have ownership or authorship over them, but they're very unwieldy and
Right.
honestly don't belong to you. They end up belonging to the audience, to the readers, and you have to let go ultimately.
That's true.
So, thank you so much, Taylor.
What a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. I hope everyone listening enjoyed. I know I did tremendously. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we
I'd love to come down and visit you at the University of Pennsylvania. Do they still have the Kelly Writers House? They
do. It's 30 years alive and thriving. So
I had a reading. I recorded one of my CDs back when we thought that poetry, spoken word really needed to be on a CD. I recorded one of my CDs at the Kelly Writers House.
They have a great, Pen Sound? It's like one of the largest collections of recorded poems available online.
Well, it looks like you ended up in the right place.
Yeah, it's fabulous. And I'm ending my last year this year. So
this coming year will be your last.
Yes.
Yeah, because in that Poetry by Chance was published in maybe 2022. And I just noticed that after your name, it said Sophia Hall 16. So you were 16 in 2022. That means you're like 20 or 21 right now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. Take care. Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening.